that is our interface. We are now ready to code. So I'm going to double click on the button. When I double click on the button, it's going to go into the code editor and create a procedure for me to handle, by default, the user clicking that button. And it gives it a name of btn role click. There's two brackets here, left curly bracket, right curly bracket. My code's going to go in between. So these are basically bookends, beginning and ending, for this procedure named btn_role. There's a bunch of other stuff here that's created for you. We won't worry about that at this point. We'll talk about that down the road. For now, I just want you to get a feel for how apps are created. So I'm going to write my code here. My first line is going to be the word random. RND, which is going to be the name of my random object. I'm naming it RND. Could name it Fred, or anything else you choose. Names have to be all lowercase. You have to start with letters. No special characters other than the underscore. So it's going to equal new random. Random is a class in and of itself, and putting the parentheses there basically pulls up the what we call the constructor for the class, and it's going to build a new random object for us. So our random object is going to be named RND. I put a semicolon at the end of the line. That's required in C# to indicate the end of the line. Then I'm going to create some integer variables. So int die1, die2, total, those are separated by commas, and a semicolon. So I have three variables, die1, die2, and total. Variable is some place in memory that's going to contain a value, and I can manipulate that value and change it. I need to assign a value to those, so here's where we're going to use that random object. Die1 equals RND. I'm going to say give me a next integer with a value of 0 to 5. That's what the 6 is. But I want a value from 1 to 6, so I'm going to add 1 to it. So I'm going to create a similar line for die2. Die2 equals RND dot next 6 plus 1 semicolon. Total is going to equal die1 plus die2. Now, I typed die1 plus die3. Notice that it put a little red squiggly underneath my die3. Whenever you see squigglies in your code, that's a bad thing. That means it didn't understand something you typed. Something's wrong. As I point my mouse to it, it tells me the name die3 does not exist in the current context. In essence, I don't have a variable called die3. This should have been a 2. So if I didn't change that, this would not compile. But if I change it, the little squiggly goes away. Okay, so next thing I want to do is change the images on my dice. So I have LBL die1 dot. This is called dot notation. When I type the dot, I get the IntelliSense of C# telling me here are all the properties and the events and the methods associated with that label that you've named LBL die1. What I want here is to change the image index. I'm just going to type an I, and it scrolls down the I's, and I can either type image index or I can double click on it. And I want this to equal die1. Okay, same thing here, LBL. Let me make another mistake here, LBL die3 dot. And I don't get the IntelliSense, and again it tells me LBL die3 does not exist in the current context. So here it's saying, rather than a variable, it's saying you don't have a label or a control named LBL die3. So I'll fix that. And again, I want the image index, and it's going to equal die2. And the last thing I want to do is put the information of our role into the list box. So it's going to contain a history of our roles. So LST roles was the name of my list box. And I'm going to go to the items collection. I'm going to insert in location 0. That's going to be at the very top. So in parentheses, I'm putting a 0 and a comma. And this is where it gets a little bit dicey. We're going to do something called concatenation, where we're putting several things together to be displayed in that line of our list box. So the first thing I want is die1. And since it's an integer, I need to convert it to a string. I'm going to add to that quote, space, plus, space, quote. This is called concatenation. So I'm adding a literal string. I want that plus sign to come after my first die value. And then I'm going to find die2 and convert that to a string. And add to that, or concatenate to that, space equals space. And I'm going to add to that total dot to string. Now I need a parenthesis at the end of that. For every left parenthesis, I must have a right paren. So they should match up. And I get a little squiggly here under die 2. That's because I forgot a plus sign here. So no squigglies. I've got a semicolon at the end. It doesn't mean that's the end of my line. And everything looks good. So I'm going to go to the File menu and simply choose Save All. So when you save your documents, always choose Save All. I would caution you never choose Save Form1.cs as, because then it lets you put your form someplace else than the solution, and all of a sudden your files are dispersed across your computer, and if you go to copy things, it'll be hard to find them. So always use Save All, never use Save As. I'm going to Save All, and then I'm going to click Start up here on the top. This is going to compile our project into an executable. The IDE will gray out. It'll bring up the window of our solution, and we can test it. So here then is my project. I'm going to click Roll Dice, and I got a 3 and a 3, and it tells me 3 plus 3 is 6. I'm going to click it again. Happen to get the same thing another time. Now I got 6 plus 3 equals 9, 2 plus 1 equals 3, and so forth. Getting a lot of 3's here, but there's 4 plus 1 equals 5, 6 plus 5 equals 11. So it seems like it works. Now what if, let me make a change here. We talked about debugging. I'm going to run this again. So I change this die 2 to die 1. And the result is, every time I click, I get double as far as what's being shown here. But it tells me 3 plus 5 equals 8. Well, that's not right. I'm getting a 3 and a 3. I'm getting a 5 and a 5, and it's saying it's 11. So something went wrong here. This is not a syntax error. It's a logic error. There's nothing wrong with what I've written as far as my code. There's no errors in the code. But there is errors in terms of what I wanted to have happen. I'm setting both images to the same die, the same number. So I'm going to set LVL die 2 equals to 2. So that's part of the debugging and testing process, making sure things work as we think they should, and if not, making changes. Then we want to test again and make sure everything's working. Still getting doubles. Oh, that just happened the first time, so I can see now that my process is working fine. And just by luck of the draw, I happen to get a fair amount of doubles. Now, there's one more thing I'd like to do. I'd like to have my form be the same color as the background of my graphic up at the top. So I'm going to come back to my design view. There's this tab up here for Form 1 Design. So I can toggle between the design and the code. We can have different types of events. Earlier I double-clicked on the button to write code for that button. I'm going to double-click somewhere on the form outside one of these controls. I get another method. This one's called form1_load. That's the name of the method. It's going to handle the loading of the form. And what I'm going to do here is say this dot backcolor equals, color.from ARGB. That's red, green, blue. A is the alpha, so alpha, red, green, blue. And I can specify any one of the 16.7 million colors if I know the integer values. I happen to know that that color is 213, 127, 0. So quite a bit of red, average green, no blue. And I want a semicolon at the end of that. So now when I run this, it's going to run this code in the form load when it first starts up. Let's try this. And there we go. So my image now looks much better. It looks like the graphic is just part of the background. And you can see it still works. Now I'm going to show you one more thing, and that is I'm going to go to my project where it's saved. And so I have here my project, 01 Dice Roller CS. I'm going to open that up. So here's the solution file. If we later wanted to come back, we shut down Visual Studio, you want to come back tomorrow, open it back up, you can double click on this SLN file and that will launch you back into Visual Studio and open up your solution. But there's also other folders here. I'm going to burrow down a little bit. Here's my Form 1 folder. It has also a resource folder. It has the design information, which is actually code that's done for us. There's several more folders here. I'm going to go into the bin folder. I'm going to go to the debug folder. And in the debug folder is my 01 Dice Roller CS.exe. This is the executable that was created when we clicked the start button. It is this file that we could distribute to somebody via CD, via thumb drive, put it on their computer, and they can run it. Just to demonstrate that, if I double click on it, it runs my application. They would not need Visual Studio to run this. When you go to submit projects in this class, you're going to find your whole project, the whole project folder. You're going to right click on it and you're going to say send to compressed zipped folder. That will create a zip of it. It's a compressed file that contains all the subfiles. That's what you would upload into Canvas for me to be able to grade it. Okay, I'm going to create the same thing in Visual Basic. I'm going to come to my form first in C#. I'm going to select everything on the form, Control A. I'm going to copy it so I can just paste it into my new form in Visual Basic. So to create a Visual Basic application, I'm going to go to New, File New, Project. And here I'm going to go down to Other Languages, choose Visual Basic, Windows. And again, I want a Windows Form application. I'm going to name this one 01 Dice Roller VB for Visual Basic. I'm going to put it in the exact same spot. Click OK. And I'm going to start with my form. Just as we did before, I'm going to change the title of the form. Dice Roller, put VB in parentheses. I'm going to set the size of my form to 480, 800. And then I'm simply going to paste all those controls from the C# project. Now the only thing that didn't come in was the graphic that was assigned to this object, to my picture box. So I'm simply going to go back and select that again. And I'm going to start by coding my form load. A little bit different this time. I'm going to double click on the form load, on the form, get the form load procedure. And here in VB, we're getting a private sub end sub. Rather than the curly brackets, these are our bookends of beginning and ending. My code's going to go in between that. So in C# we had this dot backcolor equals color dot from ARGB. Here it's a little bit different. It's going to be me. Me refers to the form, just like this in C# referred to the form itself. Me dot backcolor equals color dot from ARGB, and I want 213 comma 127 comma 0. I don't need to put any semicolons here. I'm simply going to run my program at this point. And you can see that our form now is the same color as the background of our image. Okay, I'm going to close my running app to go back to the IDE Visual Studio. I'm going to come back into the Design tab. I want to code the button. I'm going to double click on Roll the Dice. Here then is my private sub for btn roll underscore click. You can ignore all this other stuff after it. Notice that it handles the click event of btn roll. So the btn roll underscore click is simply the name. This is what's being handled in Visual Basic. So very similar to what we had before. I want to create a random object. So in VB it's a little bit different. It's going to be dim for dimension. Dim RND as new random. And then I'm going to dim die1, die2, and total as integers. So dim is what we use to create objects and to create variables. Die1 equals rnd.next, 6 in parentheses, plus 1. Same thing for die2. So total can equal die1 plus die2. My label LBL die1 dot image index equals die1. LBL die2 dot image index equals die2. And our list box LST roles dot items dot insert. I want to put at the very top, so it's going to be 0 and then a comma. And what I want to insert is die1 converted to a string, so .toString. And rather than plus signs in VB, we use ampersands. This is concatenation. So I want to add to die1 a string of space plus space. That is enclosed in quotes, and it's a literal string. And concatenate to that die2 dot toString. Concatenate to that a literal string of space equals space. And concatenate to that total dot toString. Need a closing parenthesis, and that is my VB code. Let's see if it works. Not much different from the C# code. And that seems to work just fine. Notice that as I put a whole bunch of roles in here, we do get in the list box, and we get a scroll bar to be able to go through them.